I know that thanks to Western support, Western weapons were still standing. But what would Russia do without China, India, Iran?
It's a good question as to the extent to which North Korea and Iran and China have been a game changer for Russia. Have they kept Russia in the war? I don't know. I think that obviously they've gone to these countries in desperation. They've not been able to do it themselves. I mean, Russia has certain limitations. So it has certainly been useful. I mean, if you take the North Korean soldiers, for example, if nothing else, they have managed to free up Russian capabilities elsewhere. So, and China, as I say, I think has probably given more than Western politicians would like to admit. We're sort of in denial about the extent of Chinese assistance to Russia. And obviously, as far as Iran is concerned, then because that is the other major issue in the world right now, then I think that has sort of distracted Western attention there, and I don't think Iran's assistance on its own is particularly consequential. But cumulatively, together, yeah, I think that we shouldn't forget that Russia has allies in the global south, in other dictatorships. These countries don't have anything in common. There's no union with them particularly, not even BRICS or anything ridiculous like that. But actually, they do have common cause, which is a certain bizarre respect for Russia, what it's achieved, by which I mean in terms of its standing up to America. They have anti-Americanism, so they have this common cause. We shouldn't underestimate Russia's abilities diplomatically, its persuasive abilities to get these countries on side. It shouldn't be us. We thought in the initial days of the war that, yeah, it was the world against Russia. That's not, unfortunately, true. I'm afraid Russia has a great deal of support from the countries whose regimes that it props up in Africa, in Latin America, as well as the ones that you've already mentioned. Russia, I think, will continue to get that kind of support. We have to accept that is a factor, that is part of a war, and it is a little bit worrying because I think China does not want Russia to lose this war. And
why?
Because
to weaken the Russia and to have more influence, or something else?
I think it was, again, yes and yes, all of these factors. Obviously, it would really make them think twice about any takeover of Taiwan. But more than that, I think that it's just not in Chinese interests to have a victorious West, which has shown that liberal democratic values and Western military might can beat the Russian machine. That is not the outcome that China desires. China's not as much of a pyromaniac as Russia is. China is more diplomatically capable, but if you were to ask them, what is the extent to which is China on side? I know China's interests and Russia's interests are not fully aligned. China wants to prosper in the world system. Russia wants to bring the world system down. But I think, Putin and Xi have a very close relationship. We know this. And it is, China, look, it probably was surprised by the war. It didn't necessarily want that upheaval in international relations, but I think now that they're in it, they want Russia to win it. Or at the very least, there to be no satisfactory Western victory. And at the end of the day, of course, they care nothing for Ukraine, right? I mean, it is an irrelevance to them. It's as much of a non-country to them as it is to Russia. It doesn't matter. It doesn't count. And so, yeah, I know some people think we should try to split China off from Russia. I just don't see that as being a likely winning course of action, I'm afraid to say.
Yeah. It's the same that we will never change our neighbor, Russia.
Absolutely.
I mean...
And therefore, you know, I mean, you'll never change your neighbor, but the only way in which you can really coexist peacefully, is with a different Russia. We've already spoken about the fact how very unlikely that is. So I'm sorry to say that Ukraine is going to live with insecurity for even longer than the war, because even a victorious Ukraine will leave a resentful Russia. Yeah, and that's better than a Russia we're at war with.
Yeah.
But I'm afraid that there will be no security until Russia is a liberal democratic country, and that looks like, you know, a fantasy.
But how are the countries that are living safe bordering with Russia? I'm not talking Belarus.
Yeah, I mean, no. Yeah, I understand. Although you're not wrong. I mean, you never know. I mean, Belarus has had its attempt at revolution. It didn't work out. The people weren't strong enough, and that's it.
But unfortunately, yes.
But you're right. And so I think other countries are at risk as well. Russia wants an empire. It doesn't solely include Ukraine, but Ukraine is, if you like, the first among those equals. And Ukraine is historically, albeit faux-historically, pseudo-historically important to Russia. I think Putin prizes Ukraine amongst all else. It's not as if Kyrgyzstan matters that much. Belarus matters, Georgia to an extent, Armenia. I mean, there's a sort of a concentric circles, and but I'm afraid that Ukraine, and then Moldova afterwards, I guess, as being the most likely candidate for EU entry, is the primary target. But yeah, of course, northern Kazakhstan isn't entirely safe. That's true, but it's not in the immediate sights.
I just want to get back to the question about the weapon producing. I don't know whether it's the same factory or no, but I saw a very strong investigation of a Russian opposition journalist that that published the news that in Tatarstan they are also have a huge factory that are producing drones, but I don't think that's the same one. No. Yeah, next to the university, and they are using, maybe you've heard about that, they're using 15, 16, 17 years old students to produce drones. And by the way, they are using data apps like Tinder just to get African girls to go to the university, and they end up at this factory. That was a huge investigation, also just during these days published, like 1 week ago.
I mean, I haven't maybe read the same story as you, but I completely concur that, in fact, Russia is using teenagers who are into gaming to adapt that skill towards drone technology. And so, yeah, they were very. It is absolutely an established, verified fact that Russia is not just has mobilized all levels of society, from the elderly veterans to the teenagers, in order for this one most important existential for Russia, as they see it, cause. So, I mean, I don't know your specific story about Kazan, I presume, but I absolutely know that in their desperation to match and outgun and outmaneuver the Ukrainians, that the Russians are also that's what I'm trying to say. They're adapting, they're innovating themselves. Maybe not technologically, but they are able to. We shouldn't mistake a rubbish plan for a rubbish army. Of course, they got it wrong at the start. They underestimated Ukraine, but actually, the history of Russian military warfare is that they are able to adapt to changing deleterious situations, and that is one example. But I suspect there are numerous others, and so I think it doesn't pay to underestimate the adversary.